I challenged myself to read popular indie romances for the entire week. Hi guys, welcome back to the channel. Now for today's video, I'm doing a review video of all the books I've managed to finish this week that are indie published and that are trending either on BookTok, they're talked about a lot on BookTube, or maybe you've seen the covers on Bookstagram. Now, I personally don't read indie romances that often. I tend to lean towards more of a traditionally published romance side, mostly because it's a personal preference. I like the writing more in traditionally published romance. It's more accessible to me in terms of different formatting like audiobooks and also physical copies. They tend to be cheaper than indie published romances for me here in Canada. That being said, I still like reading indie romances sometimes because I find that the writing is very easy to sink into. They're usually written in first person, so it's even more relatable. Also because of the fact that indie romances mean that the authors have more creativity in what they want to do with the plot. So I do understand why a lot of people like reading indie romances. So I decided to pick some of the most popular indie romances that people are reading, and I want to see what the hype is about. So I think the first book that I want to talk about is actually the first book in a series that I actually managed to finish this whole entire week. I finished the Off-Campus series by Elle Kennedy. Now these books were probably published in the later 2010s, and everybody has already talked about it when it first came out, but it since has made like a second wave of popularity thanks to BookTok, and also the younger generation of readers have now grown up to become new adult readers. So they're just rediscovering this whole series and it's becoming popular again. Now the Off-Campus series features a sports romance, and it's about 4 hockey players on the university team and them finding love, them individually having their own story filled with familiar tropes that we are all comfortable with. And it also involves a lot of conflict that usually tends to happen towards the end. So it's kind of like a third act where there's conflict and the characters might not be able to have their happily ever after. Now the first book in the series is The Deal, and this one follows the trope of a really nerdy, smart, intelligent girl who has to tutor our hero because he is a jock, and of course he wouldn't know how to ace exams and ace tests and things like that because all he cares about is hockey. But little did we know, our hero is actually pretty brilliant, but he just needs help with this one particularly hard class. Our heroine is really bright, she's really smart, and she managed to ace it. So they kind of just meet and he persuades her into tutoring him. Now there are some trigger warnings with this book that I didn't know when I was reading it, but I didn't. So I wanted to tell you that this book also features SA, and it is very traumatizing to our heroine because it happened to her when she was in university, which she still is in university, and it does carry out throughout the whole plot, and she does discuss about the impacts and the repercussions of SA and how that impacted her life going forward and how that impacted her relationships going forward too as well. I like this book because I thought that the chemistry was just off the chart. Our 2 characters are opposites attract, and I found that their banter, I found that the things that they were doing to each other to get to know each other were really cute too as well. But the thing is that I really didn't like the ending of the book. I felt that the conflict was way too rushed, and I just expected a lot more clarity. I expected a lot more build up, especially since we spent so much time developing that relationship. So overall, I gave this one a 3.5 out of 5 stars, and I was quite disappointed with this one simply because when I first started reading it, I thought that this one would be a solid 4 or 5 out of 5 stars. Okay, so the second one is called The Mistake, and now this one follows a second chance romance where basically our heroine and hero had this one-night stand and he royally messed up, and she is heartbroken by it, but she picks herself back up and then she walks away from the situation and she no longer wants anything to do with our hero. Our hero knows that he completely messed up and now he has to kind of like beg for forgiveness because he literally cannot stop thinking about her and he really wants to be with her regardless of what his teammates say. He wants to have a stable relationship. So this is kind of like the story where he's trying to win her back. And if you're a fan of this kind of trope, you're definitely going to like this one. But for some reason for me, I just struggled a lot with the chemistry between our 2 characters who are named Logan and Grace. And I just didn't feel the connection that I did have with our first couple in The Deal. So then this one was kind of hard harder for me to finish because it just ran a lot slower because of the lack of chemistry. I gave this an average rating of 3 out of 5 stars, and it definitely made me kind of want to take a pause with the off-campus series because I was scared that the third book would be worse than the second book. So with that being said, I did take a pause with the off-campus series and I moved on to another read that a lot of my friends, such as Jessica from Peace Love Books, have read that she really enjoyed. I've seen this cover floating around on BookTube and talked about on BookTok, so I was kind of interested in it simply because the cover really didn't tell me anything about it. There's this trend going around for discrete covers for romance novels that basically don't tell you anything about what the story is about. But from the design of this book, I thought that it was going to be a darker romance. Now, this book is called The Confidence of Wildflowers by Micalea Smeltzer, and now this one involves a taboo romance. It's our hero is a lot older than our heroine. Our heroine is around 18 years old when she first meets our hero, who is on the cusp of turning 32, and he just moved into the house next door, and she is still kind of dealing with life after her father's death. She never really had a good relationship with her father, and a trigger warning is that there is SA involved too as well, and it's also just plain family taboo and incest and things like that. So if you guys are not comfortable with reading essay involving those topics, definitely don't pick this book up. It dealt a little bit with that trauma, but it wasn't the main plot line of the book. So it wasn't like completely uncomfortable to read, and it wasn't a story necessarily about her growing up and getting over the fact that her childhood was ruined by her father. And she is intrigued by our hero because our hero is very grumpy, he's reclusive, he keeps to himself. But slowly but surely, she wins him over with her sunshine personality, and she gets to know the real him. And he's actually a single father to a little boy, and he's kind of getting his house ready so that he can stay with him. And he himself has his own trauma with dealing with a crazy ex and a toxic ex at that. And then so this is kind of like the unconventional relationship where these two characters are always hanging around, talking, getting to know each other, but also knowing that they have to kind of keep their relationship a secret. It's kind of like a love triangle situation sometimes too as well, because she really likes her boyfriend. So this book also ends off on a cliffhanger, and depending on who you've listened to about this, the cliffhanger is all right. It didn't necessarily make me want to pick up the second book right away. It's a duet, but I found that it was very dramatic, and I felt that the author was writing solely for making quotes to trend on BookTok and making them like so artsy and beautiful that it just ended up sounding very silly and forced. And I also found that it was kind of creepy between our hero and heroine. And I think this is like the reason why a lot of people didn't like the book, was because they didn't find that nice taboo chemistry, but it felt more authoritative. It felt more like our heroine was actually way too young to make suitable decisions for herself, and that she was getting herself into a very sticky situation with an older man who clearly had more authority and who clearly was an adult in the relationship. So I think that part was where everybody just kind of grew divided. And for me, for this book, I did feel that the relationship was creepy in some parts because she did feel a lot younger than she was. With that being said, it didn't stop me from picking up book number 2 because I really wanted to see what the hype was about for this series. So the second book in the series, and to finish off the duet, is called The Resurrection of Wildflowers. Now this book takes place like 8 to 6 years after the first book, and there is a lot of things happening. We realize that our heroine has moved on from our hero after the big act that happened in the second book, and she has her own life that she has to deal with. She got married and she also had a child, but she also has to move back home to take care of her mother because her mother has fallen ill, and she is worried about it because she doesn't want to see him again, but she still can't deny that she is very interested in him and that she still feels that spark. Our hero, on the other hand, is going through all the things that happened after the first book, he has learned to pick himself back up again. He has learned to be a better person and to be caring to other people through therapy, which is really nice to see. But all this kind of happened in that weird gap of the 6 to 8 years that the reader doesn't really see. It's just kind of told to us that in those 6 to 8 years since the first book, they did all these things. It felt like that there was a disconnect between the first and second book simply because there's a whole gap that we couldn't see. And when we enter the second book, everything is already being established. All our characters are healed magically, and we're just jumping right back into redeveloping that relationship between our hero and heroine. It threw me a little bit off, but I still kept reading it. And overall, this romance was a lot sweeter than the first one. Obviously, our heroine is older now. She's wiser. She can make her decisions. So it didn't feel as taboo. And overall, I liked it a lot better than the first one. It was very sweet a lot of the times. It was definitely comforting and very cozy too as well. But I still gave it a 3 out of 5 stars because it just wasn't enough and it wasn't impressing me by a lot. So after all that, I didn't want to return back to the off-campus series, but I did know that I want to try out another popular sports romance. Now, this one hasn't been talked about on BookTok or BookTube yet, but it was very popular back in the day when it's first released. This one's called The Hookup by Kristen Callihan, and I've never read Kristen Callihan before. My friends Lacey and Jessica have read her before, and they really like her writing, and I wanted to see what the hype was about, and I can see why they love Kristen Callihan a lot. Because you can tell that Kristen is very smart by the way that she kind of like runs her sentences and how she writes her sentences and how she tells a story, how she develops her characters and how she develops the scene. And it's very detailed. So The Hookup is the first book in her series called the Game On series. And this one involves like football. Our hero is in university and he is the star football player. Everybody freaking loves him because he's the one that is helping the team win all these championships, and our heroine is more on the bookish nerdy side. So once again, it's that trope where our hero is the dumb jock and our heroine is the school study nerd type of character. And she and him have a class together, and he unfortunately put his foot in his mouth, said something really rude to her upon their first meeting because he grew so flustered because he fell in love at first sight. But she is unconvinced of him because she knows that he has a reputation of always having a lot of girls following him, and she essentially thinks that he is a player and that he's not going to be serious in any relationship. He wants to stay near her, but she wants to stay away from him. They end up having a hookup, and they end up having this kind of understanding that they will look towards each other for physical intimacy, but no feelings to be involved. And she, for the most part, is the one that's keeping at arm's length from our hero because she just doesn't want to get emotions involved because she knows that she's going to get badly hurt. So it was frustrating a lot of times reading about our heroine who was just so distant from our hero, and our hero who was really open about his emotions, open about his backstory, and open about the challenges that he's facing as an athlete. And our heroine was just not doing enough. So if you're looking for a book where the heroine is more flawed than the hero, then this one's for you. But for me, I felt that the book was way too long. I felt that it was probably like near 400 pages, and it just felt like the story was dragging along long time. It never felt like it was ending. And the drama towards the end where, you know, she discovers that she was actually the toxic person in the relationship all along in the story, it felt that it was like a little bit too dramatic for my taste, but it definitely was entertaining. So this one, I ended up giving it a solid 3 out of 5 stars. Do I want to continue on with the second book in the series? Maybe, but sometime near in the future, because Kristen Callihan's writing was just really heavy for me in a lot of parts because it was just so long and descriptive. So even after all that, I felt like I needed a little palate cleanser. I felt like I needed something easier to read, and a lot of people were talking about this book. My friend Samantha from Books with Samantha read this book. It was her ultimate favorite book. She made a whole video about it because she loved it this much. And then Jessica saw Samantha read it, so then Jessica read it, and Jessica loved it as well. So Lacey read it, and then Lacey loved it. So I was like thinking to myself, like, when am I going to read this? So I finally picked up The Pool Boy by Nikki Sloane, and this one is essentially an age gap romance. Our heroine is the older female in the relationship, and our hero just finished college. He doesn't have a proper full-time job yet, so he does a whole lot of jobs, but one of his jobs is being the pool boy. He cleans the pools and he does like the landscaping and things like that. Our heroine is a lot older. She is married at the beginning of the book, but unfortunately for her, she walks into her husband having an affair with another man, and she is left devastated by this. So they agree that they're going to have a divorce. She feels very depressed about it. She decides that she is going to have some plastic surgery done so that she can have some bigger breasts. And they meet. Our hero and our heroine meet each other in the backyard, and she unfortunately is topless, and he is trying to hold back his attraction to her. Another element of tabooness is that our heroine is actually best friends with our hero's mother. So they've known each other for a very long time. It didn't feel like a grooming situation, but it just felt like that they established that she is a close family friend. So they decide to have a secret relationship where it just feels like it's a one-time thing that carries on to another time, that carries on to another time. But then slowly but surely it grows deeper and deeper because they keep pillow talking, and they know that, you know, this could be the start of something real and something honest. Our heroine is also like an agent for the stars. So she looks for talent, and then she tries to make them the next big music artist, and our hero just so happens to play in a band. He can sing, he can play guitar, he's really good looking, so she wants to sign him so that he can have a record label and that he can be famous because of his talent. So this story turned into kind of like a taboo romance into a celebrity romance, which I was not expecting, and I don't personally like celebrity romances, and I don't like rock star romances, so it was like two things going against me for this book. But I felt that the romance between our two characters were very natural. It wasn't creepy at all. It felt like the real deal. And I felt that it was like convincing me that age doesn't matter in a relationship as long as everybody is on the same page. Overall, I enjoyed the story, but because of those two themes that I don't really like and I don't really care about, and them playing a bigger role towards the end of the book, I had to give this one an average like 3.5 out of 5 stars. I liked it, but it's not my favorite. And then I moved on to like a new adult novel, but then it takes place, I believe, in a high school. So it's not really young adult because there's sexual scenes in it. But this one's called Dear Love, I Hate You by Eliah Greenwood. And this one is a bully romance. It's not really a bully romance because it's literally like one scene where our hero was mean to her, and then they called it a bully romance. So I was kind of disappointed by it, but like it wasn't the reason why I wanted to read it in the first place. The reason why I wanted to read it was because I liked the premise and the idea that this girl wrote a note, and then she slipped the note into a book, and then she forgot about it, and then that book got returned to a shelf, and then she needs to go retrieve that note before anybody reads it because she'll get in trouble. And then when she goes back to the library to go get that book, somebody else already took that note and is writing back with another note, and then that's how they communicate. Like they just share notes with each other in the book, and then they don't know each other's identities, and then later on they traded phone numbers, and then that's how they constantly communicate with each other instead of just going back and forth to the library. Overall, this book was very dramatic in the way that, you know, I always expected indie romances to be. Like our characters have insane backstories. Like our hero has this like really just baffling involving his mother and his friends, and how his mother just cheats on her husband a lot with his friends. Like it's just baffling to me. And then our heroine has her own backstory too as well. But overall, I felt that the pacing of this book was weird too as well, because our heroine figured out who was writing letters to her very early on, but then she just didn't want to tell him. It threw me a bit of a curveball. I didn't know how to feel about that. But overall, once again, I felt this book dragged on for too long. I gave it a 3 out of 5 stars. It wasn't as cute as I thought it would be. Okay, so finally, after all that, I finally bit the bullet and I decided to pick up another off-campus series book. And this one's called The Score, which is book number 4 in the series. Now, this one involves kind of like a frenemies situation. Our hero and heroine bicker back and forth all the time. It's kind of like enemies to lovers, and it's so cute watching them kind of interact with each other in the beginning, because she finds him absolutely repulsive and then he's always just teasing her, but then they always hang out with each other because they're all in like the same group of friends. And then one day they decide to watch boring movies with each other, and then they decide to drink a lot of shots, and then one thing leads to another, and then it's kind of like a blackout, and then she wakes up and she realizes that she had a one-night stand with our hero. And she is trying to write it off, trying to say this is a one-time exception, it just happened, forget about it. But she is more attracted to him more than ever. And they start to have this secret relationship where they're just hooking up. They're not telling their friends. They're kind of going about it. And then obviously feelings develop and they want to go steady. Our hero has kind of like a very interesting backstory that I appreciated. It's more of like the rich boy sad story where he's just so rich that everybody kind of feels that he is entitled, that he feels that all his successes are because of his family's name, which is kind of like a story that I've heard about, or like a trope that I've heard about before, but I haven't seen recently. So it was kind of refreshing to see our hero being the biggest sweetheart, biggest teddy bear ever, because even though he grew up with a lot of money, his family never spoiled him, and his family made sure that he worked hard for his own grades, that he worked hard for his career in sports, and that he worked hard in life, and he gives back to the community. He hangs out with children, and it's just so freaking adorable. I love our hero the most from this story. He's one of my favorites of this whole book series. It was a solid 5 out of 5 throughout the whole book until the third act again. And, you know, that whole crazy shenanigan business had to happen because, of course, we had to have that drama and the theatrics and things like that. And it just took away my enjoyment of it because I felt it was sloppy. It felt like it was rushed. It felt like it, you know, got resolved too quickly once again. I had to bump it down a star, but it was a 4 out of 5 for me. It was one of my favorites of the whole series, and I wanted to slip into the next one, which is book number 4. So book number 4 is called The Goal, and this one, the synopsis kind of already gives you a hint of what trope to expect. It's a surprise pregnancy trope, which I was very unsure about, and I didn't know if I wanted to read this one because our heroine sounded very, you know, sharp. She sounded like she's career driven. She sounded like she knows what she wants to do for the rest of her life, which is to graduate out of university, go to law school, become a kick-ass lawyer, and then hopefully kind of like build her wealth, because she grew up in a community where it's low income and she struggled a lot with poverty, and her family still struggles a lot with poverty. So she's kind of like very different from all the other characters in the off-campus series where they are wealthy or they have average stable incomes from their family. She is like the one that's working hard and trying to make money to make ends meet. Meanwhile, our hero is kind of like more leaning towards the upper class side, and they have this one night stand, and you know, things happen, and then they continue to have these like hookup sessions until somewhere near the middle of the book she realizes that she is pregnant, and that they have to make a decision of whether or not they either want to keep the baby or they want to kind of have that relationship too as well. Like, are they going to co-parent? Are they going to be together? We don't know. We have to figure it out. There's also something that carries over from the first 3 books into the 4th book. It's kind of like within like kind of like the same timeline, time span, where the characters have to deal with the loss of a loved one. So everybody's handling the grief in different ways. and you can see how all the boys kind of cope with losing this person. I also felt that this book was extremely boring. There was no chemistry that I felt whatsoever with our two characters, and I was just kind of reading it just so that I can say that I finished the off-campus series. It's definitely one of my least favorites. I will give it a very low 3 out of 5 stars, or even a 2.5 out of 5 stars, simply because I felt no chemistry whatsoever, and I was just kind of begging for the book to end. I thought that the surprise pregnancy would happen earlier on in the book, and then that's where the drama happens. But since it was like in the middle of the book and it was in the middle of their established relationship, I was just like, okay, what are we going to do next? Nothing? Like, okay. But anyways, that is it for all the popular romances that I managed to read this week. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this video, and I'll see you guys again next time in a new one. Bye.